Hi everybody, welcome to Quarantine Kitchen. This is episode 7. I'm your host Clinton, and today we're going to be making a very unique and delicious recipe, Colonial era bread. Now I was looking online, and there's a lot of other people who are showing how to make bread in your home, because a lot of us are apparently struggling to find it. And I wanted to do something a little different than just your basic white bread or bread with no yeast. I'm actually going to make a bread tonight with dry yeast, and it's a very, very old American recipe from the colonial era. So I'm going to show you how to make it with all the ingredients, and while we're going through, I'll explain how you can substitute particular ingredients with things that you might have in your home. So as usual, let's start with the ingredients. To do this recipe, you don't need a lot of things. You need your basic white flour. You need your dry yeast. We're going to be using a cornmeal, but if you don't have cornmeal, polenta is a good substitute. That's something that you can easily find in a grocery store. We're lucky enough to have been able to find molasses, but if you don't have molasses, because this is an American ingredient, you can use maple syrup or brown sugar and just substitute the exact amount that I would do with maple syrup or brown sugar. Then you need butter at room temperature and salt. And that's all you're going to need for today's bread. Now, it's going to happen in a couple different stages. But it's not a lot of work. Just takes a little bit of time for the dough to rise, for things to cool down, and we'll do it together. But it is definitely, you don't need to be an expert in bread making to make this recipe. All right, so let's go ahead and start. You're going to take a medium bowl, as so, and you're going to put in 1 pack of dry yeast, which is 2.5 tablespoons. Now you see our dry yeast. Then you're going to take 3.5 cups of bread flour. So let's go ahead and we combine it all together. You can take a fork and just kind of mix it together. All right, and then once that's combined, you're going to save that for later. Go ahead and put it to the side. Take yourself a big bowl. Now you're going to take cornmeal. We're going to be using 1/3 cup cornmeal or your polenta. Put it in the big bowl. Then you're going to take 1.5 cups boiling water. We have pre-boiled ours. Put it directly in there with the cornmeal or polenta. And now you're going to whisk it until it's nice and smooth. Let's go ahead and whisk it away. Now, if you're using polenta, it's going to be a little bit chunkier. It's just polenta and corn flour is the same thing, or cornmeal. It's just that polenta is a little bit coarser, but it's a perfectly fine thing to use if you don't have anything else. So that's the texture you're going to be looking for, more or less. And then you're going to add your 1/3 cup molasses or maple syrup or brown sugar, depending on what you have. Put it in. Once you get the molasses in there, you're going to put in 1 tablespoon of that room temperature butter. That in there. And then finally, 1 teaspoon salt. And once you have your 1 teaspoon of salt in there, all your ingredients, you're going to go ahead and stir it all together. Now your color might be a little different depending on whether or not you used real molasses or a substitute. Don't worry about that. Now before we can continue to work with this, we're going to have to set it to the side for about 30 minutes, more or less, until it's cooled down. All right, let's go ahead and set it to the side.
30 minutes later.
Welcome back. We have now waited a little while for this to cool to room temperature. So we're going to take our molasses mixture, and then if you remember the flour yeast mixture we did earlier, we're going to go ahead and combine it directly with the molasses mixture we did. Put it all in there. And this is going to constitute the dough now. So I like to use a small wooden spoon to go ahead and get it started, the mixture. And what we want to do is get it as mixed together as possible. And then we're going to go ahead and knead it out a little bit. And I will show you that once we have it nicely mixed. You want to make a ball of the dough. So just keep mixing it. The flour, especially if you use the molasses, it will be soaked in pretty quickly, so just keep going until it's all absorbed in. Now, you might find, for example, I think my dough mixture here might be a little dry, which is fine. You can add just a teaspoon of water, do little bit by little bit to get the right consistency. So I'm going to need to add a little bit of water to this, I think. I'm just going to add just a tiny bit. There we go. Now we're getting a good consistency. So basically you want to do this until your dough is just lightly floured but not sticky. If it's sticky, you need to add a little bit of flour to it. Now I'm going to add a little bit of flour. All right, so this is, see how it's not sticky, it's very lightly floured. I've kneaded the dough. You have a nice consistency there. Now what we're going to go ahead and do, put it in there, and you're going to cover it with a cloth. All right, so for your dough to rise, it's going to take approximately 45 minutes, maybe a little more, a little less, it depends. It needs to be in a warm area, so it depends, I guess, on what time of year you're making this. It is summer, or it feels like summer anyways here, so I'm going to go ahead, you need to cover it up. I like to use a cloth, put it on the side, and we'll be back in 45 minutes, and hopefully it'll be a nice fluffy piece of bread, and we'll go ahead and start cooking it. All right, so it's been about 45 minutes, a little bit more actually. It's risen a little bit, as you can see, and what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just punch it once, so let's do that. Get all that air out of there. I am going to put a little bit more flour in here because we're going to need our bread. Okay. Because now you might notice it's very sticky. And so actually this recipe, what we've done, it's enough for 2 loaves of bread. So, all right, put a little bit more flour on there. Oops. We're going to, so let's knead the bread first, and then what I've done is I've greased a glass pan over here. Now if you have a tubed metal pan, that works just as fine as well, but basically you want to use a bread pan. Grease it up, and then take the bread, and we're going to knead it for just a little bit. I've added some flour, so now it's a little less sticky. And actually what we're going to do is we're going to divide this dough in half, and then we're going to put half of it into our pan, and I'm going to save the other half in the fridge. You can keep it in the fridge for a few days. Since we go through bread not so fast, I want to cook it later. Or if you guys are, your household or yourself goes through bread quickly, you can go ahead and cook them back to back, or in 2 pans if you have it. So, once we have it like that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to break it in half. And we're going to go ahead and put it into our pan. Now, you want to form it to fit your pan. So here I'm just pushing it out a little bit. Now, you're going to cover it again, and you're going to let it settle into the pan a little bit and rise within the pan before we cook it. So go ahead and cover it up again, and then, let's say like in a half hour, we'll put it in the oven.
Meanwhile,
so we have put the dough that we're going to be cooking in the pan to the side. I just want to show you guys, if you want to save your dough for another day, go ahead and make sure you seal it very, very well. We're going to be using plastic wrap. If you guys have a container as well that's airtight, that will work. But you want to make sure it's well sealed within the plastic wrap. No air gets in there. And you can keep it in your fridge up to about 3 days. But really make sure there's no air in there. Okay, there we go. We'll pop it in the fridge. And it'll be fresh bread in just a few days.
a few minutes later.
So we have let our dough rise a little bit inside the pan. Before we put it in, let's go ahead and set our oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 170 degrees Celsius. We've already preheated ours, so we're going to go ahead and put it in there. And you're going to leave it in to 40 to 45 minutes or till it's a little brown on the top.
45 minutes later.
Okay, so our bread is ready to come out. It looks super good. And let's go ahead and go straight into a little taste test. So you guys can see the inside of the bread. Now, I'm going to add a little bit of honey to my bread to do the taste. Look at that. It's cooked all the way through. And it's nice and crisp on the outside. Some delicious honey from here in France to go with this delicious bread. Let's see how it is. It's crispy on the outside. There's a little bit of sweet, of course, from the molasses that we've cooked it in. We go with, well, for breakfast, you want to have it with soup. Pretty much anything it'll go well with. So quick, easy bread you guys can make at home is a little different than your normal stuff.